Hi guys, this video covers some of the basics about plants. We're starting a new little unit here looking at plants, and tomorrow we're working on um, some stuff that relates to the different kinds of plants, and so we wanted to give you a little bit of background about those. So plants are divided into things called divisions, and they basically represent different phyla. And there's 9 divisions of plants. There's 4 of them that we're going to look at specifically. First, there's the bryophytes, and those are mosses. So there's a picture of moss here. Moss is really short, green, furry stuff that you might see covering rocks or the sides of trees. And then pterophytes are ferns. Here's a fern. You might see those if you ever go for a walk in the woods. Third division that we're going to look at is gymnosperms. Those are conifer trees, so trees that have needles and cones instead of leaves and flowers. And then finally, the angiosperms are flowering plants. And you can have flowering plants like flowers like this. You can also have flowering plants that are trees. So we'll be looking at those tomorrow in class. And then I want you to be familiar also with just some basic plant characteristics. I think everybody would remember that plants are eukaryotic. That means that they have a true nucleus and they have organelles. They're multicellular, so they're not single-celled organisms, but they're multicellular organisms. They're autotrophic. That's a word that we haven't talked about much, but we'll be talking about it a bunch going forward from this point in the year. Auto means self, and trophic basically means eat, and so they're making food for themselves is what autotrophic means. And you knew that plants did that, right? Because you're familiar with photosynthesis. So plants use photosynthesis to make their own food. Plants have a cell wall made of cellulose. So we've talked about the cell wall in plants and bacteria before, and knowing that it's made of cellulose is important. It's that's a polysaccharide, so a many sugar molecule, and so it's a carbohydrate, and it's a really strong carbohydrate that makes up the cell walls of plants. Most plants have roots, stems, and leaves, and I'm sure that you're familiar with those parts looking at the picture over here. Roots are typically in the ground, sucking up water and nutrients. Stem comes out of the ground, and the leaves are at the end of the stems, where most of the photosynthesis happens. A couple other important terms that'll be helpful when you're doing the activity in class tomorrow. We're going to do some more specific activities on these 2 topics, transport and reproduction, later this week. But just in general, transport just means how things are carried through the plant. And so the main way that things move through a plant is through vascular tissue. And that's in the case of most plants. Some plants don't have vascular tissue. You'll see that tomorrow. But most plants have vascular tissue, and those are tubes that food and water travel through in plants. There's 2 different types of vascular tissue. There's xylem and phloem. And so xylem are the tubes that transport water. Phloem transports food. And the way that I remember, even though phloem doesn't start with an F, it starts with an F sound, and food starts with F. So phloem transports food, and then xylem transports water. A couple things with reproduction in plants that we want to be clear on is there's spores, seeds, and pollen. So plants will either have spores or seeds, and there's just a little bit of difference between those. Spores are plant embryos that are in a hard protective shell, like a casing, and then seeds are another way that plants can have their embryo, and when they have a seed, the embryo has a food supply with it. So like if you think about a pinto bean, that's a seed, and so the what we're eating is basically the food supply for the little embryo that can grow from that seed. So usually um, the seeds that we eat, we're eating the food supply for the plant embryo. And then pollen is, and this may come as a surprise to some of you, pollen is plant sperm encased in a protective shell. So like in the spring when everything is yellow and green with pollen everywhere, that's millions and billions of little plant sperms encased in their yellow and green shells, um, flying all over the place. And so it's a protective shell so that the sperm can travel to other plants, because since plants can't move to find other plants to reproduce with, their reproductive cells have to travel. And so pollen travels often by air. Sometimes other animals can bring it around. We'll talk more about all of this coming up this week. So these were just some of the basics to get you ready to enter our conversations about plants this week. Have a great night. See you tomorrow.